Bam.
I'm Brad Hutchings, and this is the Break It Down Show.
Hey, man. Appreciate you coming on and talking some more AI with us. You posted a couple of articles on LinkedIn. The LinkedIn, for me, I'm challenged by LinkedIn. I want to try to give it a try, but then I get on and I'm like, why am I even bothering? It's just a social media platform doesn't work for me. But you find quite a bit of traction with this. Is this because your network is more maybe curated than mine? I didn't work in the professional world for most of my career, right? I've got little time, so I'm familiar with it, but I'm really a foreigner in that space.
So most of my LinkedIn followers I've just found in the last year, and it's just reaching out and trying to find people who are thinking about similar things. They work in similar spaces, and then testing ideas with them. I post a lot of stuff. It's what I think that day. I think probably 80% of it sticks up in, like, it still stands true in 6 months. 20% of it I absolutely fail on, for sure.
Yeah.
But
no.
Testing reactions and seeing what people think about things, it's really given me a crash course in what artificial intelligence really is, which I think it's where 99% of the people that say they're in that game really are, is they're taking a crash course however they're taking it, because it's come at us fast.
Yeah. There's one of your essays you talk about bullshit, and that's going to be one of the themes for today. But you and I have discussed this. When a software engineer or a firmware engineer or whoever is thinking about a problem that they'd like to solve, they rarely get the ground truth. They just say, hey, I can make this 2% more efficient by just doing this. It doesn't mean that anybody ever wants to adopt it. And we've seen all kinds of things like get a lot of attention, a lot of money because there's promise, but then they disappear. And we never think about these failures again. They happen and they disappear. And so I can say a couple of things like EFTs or whatever it is, right? TaskRabbit, every new product TaskRabbit ever came out with sucked. It was just like, can you help people solve problems? Yes, that was valuable. What's the next product going to be? How about people solving problems? Right. So they would come out with all these elaborate, and I've been picking on TaskRabbit a little bit. They were great in a period of my life when I was able to make some money. But so many times these things were created and you're like, is my life any better? Is Calendly making my life any easier? No, it's not, right? I still have a calendar to deal with. So how much of that shit is bullshit, man?
Most of it.
Okay.
Most of it. Let me tell you what's happened with the tech industry over at least 20 years, at least 25 years, is we adopted and by I mean just take anybody who works in the tech industry, whatever they do. They build hardware, they write software, they work for some company that's an outsourcing firm or whatever else. We have I pull out the product people. Product people, I think, are still special. They're still trying to deliver something that people can hold and interact with and be delighted by. I think that's what drives product people. There's few of them now, but the rest of the tech industry, we've convinced ourselves that we are so good at optimizing things that we can come into whatever your problem is and we can just come optimize it because we're good at optimizing. Whereas you might be really good at your problem, but we're so good at optimizing that it doesn't matter how much better you are at your problem. Our optimized solution is better than anything you would come up with. We've got that in our heads, and it's absolutely wrong. And then in our customers' heads, the people who buy from the tech industry or who pay all this money for these things, they have lost so much confidence in themselves, their processes, their unique business value, whatever else. And whatever that's driven by. Is it driven by having to have quarterly numbers? Is it driven by like McKinsey and Company or, Arthur Andersen? They're not Arthur Andersen anymore. They're Accenture. Is it driven by IBM becoming a consulting firm? What's it driven by? I don't really know, but they have lost so much confidence in themselves, in their ability to solve the problems that they address for their customers. They've come to tech and they've come to us and they've said, hey, we don't really know what we're doing with our own problem. Just come optimize it. And then we come in and we make a mess of it. We make an absolute mess of it. We do it more expensively, but we deliver this thing called an optimized product. And though it's more expensive than what it was before, it doesn't do as much as things were before. It's optimized, so it's great. And then we move on to the next thing.
That so a lot of times we invent these products, which creates a pathway. So step A is, hey, I've solved this problem for you guys. And step B is like, did I need Facebook in my life? You know, my life was pretty sweet before. And then we sort of can kind of go on this Frankenstein adaptation thing. We're like, sew an arm onto it, you know, kind of thing, and back off and curate my feed for me. No, thanks. I'll take the most recent. No. You need it to be curated for you with an algorithm. And I'm like, honestly, I don't want that. Can I just, you know what I want so much that you don't know what I want. You don't listen to what I actually want, right? I'll handle my curation myself. And so we end up miles from the beginning of, do I need this thing or not? And now people are, it's like back when we all first got phones and we could walk around, like when everybody could really have a phone. And you're like, you know what the good idea is right now? I'm drunk. I'll call my friends. And then we eventually learned that drunk dialing, not so good, right? So did I need a phone in my pocket is the first question when I go out drinking. You know what? Only if I have an emergency, and then there's going to be someone with the phone. So no, I don't need this phone in my pocket. But we don't have that. That decision's already been made. It's in the past. If you follow what I'm saying. So we create a problem where, do I need a clone PC in my house? Well, if you want to optimize your recipes, yes. And then the next thing you know, like my lights are turned on and off by a computer in my house. What? So
controlled by some server in China that, you know, if the Chinese ever thought, okay, let's F with the Americans, it's the first thing they're going to do is flip our garage door openers open and close. That's the first sign. And that's just, hey, we're here. You know, it's us.
Right.
And then they're going to come for our lights. And then they're going to switch on porn on our TVs in front of our kids, you know, and then they're going to turn the sprinklers on. Yeah.
So when engineers are thinking of this, when I had Popping the Bubble, the show that I ran for a while with Sandra Ponce de Leon, we talked to a lot of founders, and they would make these big assumptions about what people wanted. You know, like you cannot pick I know I'm a big U2 fan, but you cannot pick my playlist because I might be listening to an artist extensively for a while because they're going to be on the show. I also like Willie Nelson. I also like, you know, Bach. And so I listen to all kinds of stuff, and I'm not really capturable, I don't think, in my head. And I don't want you to try to capture what's in my head because it already does the job for me. My little personal iPod is great. I love it. It's tuned well to me. I don't need something else to try to predict that and then jam a commercial in when I don't want a commercial.
Agreed. I mean, that's why, you know, who listens to Sirius XM radio now except for Howard? You know,
right. Yeah.
I will admit, I hate listen to talk. I hate listen, not hate listening, but I hate listen to Tom Morello when driving around in the evening, just because it's so hilarious.
Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, it's not on my things to do list.
Right. And I guess we could make the same commentary about the news and opinion, and that's all been conflated together. And so all of a sudden you realize I'm in a bullshit zone, and the bullshit is designed to make me consume a product, maybe, if I'm going to be cynical, or whatever it is, making me feel a certain, you know, I'm big on affect over effect. If I'm listening to this channel and I'm hate listening, why am I feeding hate into my life, right? And so and I know engineers don't give two fucks about this, but I also want to be fair to the engineers. That's not what they're trying to build, or maybe it is.
Pete, I want to share my diagram with you.
All right.
This is from one of my LinkedIn postings. And this is a map of the world. Okay. And one of the things with AI, the big criticism of AI is, you know, particularly like ChatGPT, is it doesn't give correct answers. And so people will say, well, why do we accept it if it gives incorrect answers, or it gives misinformation, or it get misinformation, you know, that being a key word these days. And it doesn't. And I think what people sort of expect is they expect a different world than they really live in. And so I tried to build a map of the world. And there are sort of two, you could call it two islands. They're very rectangular islands. There's the bullshit island and the truth island. And they're pretty small in this, you know, maybe they're the continents. And then we're all in the ocean. between these two continent islands on a flat world. It has to be flat just because that'll drive somebody nuts, right? That we don't have a round world here. And we all sit in this realm of bullshit, a sea of bullshit, that's some of it's true, some of it's not. One of the articles I posted that I wrote, I ran into this guy he's a sales guy, and these often appear on my feed. Somebody I'm not connected to or following, but somebody I've connected to or follow has liked their post or commented on it. And he was very proud of a prompt that he came up with for ChatGPT that kind of gave him background on a company and its products before he went into a meeting. And now, having done this, because this was one of my early experiments with ChatGPT, I knew he was getting bullshit back. I knew he was getting things that were not quite correct. Like, it might describe the product, but it probably gets a few details of it wrong or whatever else, right?
Right.
So I commented on his post, hey, how correct is the information you're getting back? And then I thought about it for about 10 minutes. I'm trying to be a smart ass and try to just, put the sales guy down for not being thoughtful, right? And I thought about it for 10 minutes and I apologized to him. I left the comment there, but I put an apology underneath. I said, you know what? I didn't think this through. I didn't think what the purpose of your question was. The purpose of your question was not to get absolute truth, for a mission against this company. The purpose of this was to just have enough that you could get through the first 5 minutes of conversation and potentially show these people that you kind of know who they are, which is like what every sales guy should do, right? I mean, if I'm on a sales call and I'm working in an office, like, the thing I might do with the water cooler is say, hey, has anybody called XYZ company before? Who'd you talk to? Whatever else. Not that I'm writing it down and taking detailed notes. I just want it for some background information. And this is when I really thought, we're evaluating these things wrong. The people who are finding use of these things, now they may not have, I think the word is ontology, this, sort of the knowledge about knowledge, how knowledge is structured. They might not have a formal ontology about what their knowledge that they're getting from these systems means, but they're acting as if they found one that works for them, that doesn't trip them up. Like, I don't know, if I'm pitching to Fisher Price and ChatGPT comes back and it says they're an important military contractor that is supplying the long-range missiles that Zelensky is now firing on Russia. Okay, this would be a bad way to go into a call with Fisher Price because they sell toys, right? So ChatGPT is not doing that. Similarly, you've got your buddy, the Rabbit Hole on here a lot, and one of his themes this year has been that these systems are biased, and I mean, my sense is he's a little like he's ascribing a little bit of intentionality to the bias, where I think there's less intentionality than he thinks. I mean, I just think when you collect the internet, and then you put rules like, or you try to put rules like, let's not put swear words out, let's not misgender people, okay. You try to put those rules in place, you're going to get some things that look like bias. And you remember I talked about, at the beginning of our conversation about how I'm wrong on 20% of things. One of the things I was very wrong on was when Google Gemini came out. And of course, it was the thing that would, say, hey, it's better to have a nuclear war than to misgender Caitlyn Jenner. Okay.
Right.
And what was there was some other thing. Oh, like we had Black George Washington. Look, Black George Washington was a badass. The only detail I care about is whether he's got wooden teeth or not. That's it. Like, he could be whatever color you want. He could be dressed up as an Apache Indian, and he's going to be a badass because he's George Washington. And as he gets in the boat to cross the Potomac, the last thing he says to his men is, get in the boat, men. That's sorry, dad joke there. But the point is, George Washington is like this huge figure that, frankly, it doesn't matter if he's white or black. And now we're fighting over whether he's white or black from a machine, which is kind of weird. So my take on that is that it actually was more intentional than people thought. that Google was basically flexing. They were saying, hey, we can do this. So they can go to states like, I don't know, Iran, and they can say, you should have AI because we can make it Ayatollah Khomeini approved. And we can hate the Jews in the Iranian AI, or whatever we want to do. We can do it. Pay us money. See, I think they were flexing. Okay. 6-7 months of reflection. Yeah, I don't think so. I think they just stumbled into their own little mistakes doing what they were doing and kind of got called out for it. And, everybody else is saying, yeah, these things are really expensive to train and they're really expensive to, kind of move toward a particular philosophy or politics or correctness or, even factiness, truthiness. They're very difficult, expensive to do that. And, they got a bad approximation. So that's one of those things where I was kind of wrong with it. Back to the whole bullshitty space, though, this is where we live. We live in bullshit space. And what these machines are helping us do is they're helping us bullshit to the next thing. When we need truth, we need to be conscious of when we need truth. But most of the time, we probably don't.
Yeah. Can we take the truth? I mean, that's the truth sometimes stings.
You can't handle the truth.
Well, I mean, legitimately, right? And then you said a word earlier that people tend to use the word ascribe, and they don't think about how negative that word is in terms of your own mistakes. So I might ascribe to you that you are a something. You could just say the word guess. And so if you said, I guess that Brad is this, I have to be ready to be wrong about that. And when we start to ascribe values to people or things, we might be wrong.
Yeah, but we have to do it.
You have to do it, but we have to understand how fallible it is to take a guess, to assume something. Now, maybe we've got a lot of information and we can say, I ascribe this person has, I love to do this. And then I don't watch much football, but I happened to watch was it last year, the 49ers in the Super Bowl? I think it was. Maybe it was 2 years ago. This is how much football I watch. But the one guy was all amped up, the linebacker, and he ran out on the field and he went right to his knees. And I'm like, I ascribe a severed Achilles tendon to that person because I know what that injury looks like, right? Mm-hmm. But if they had come back and said, "Oh no, he just had plantar fasciitis and whatever it was," I would have been wrong. But there's a thing when we try to ascribe, and it's in the bullshit zone where we want to remove a barrier from us or put a negative value on somebody. And I think ascribing is a great illustration of what you're talking about here. Is we go forward with this assumption that we're correct, that we've perfectly navigated this path, but we never think to look back and see, and this is where engineers come into this, right? If I can take this thing and make this better, therefore it's great. And one of the things I learned popping the bubble was, engineers are great, but they're not great CEOs because they don't know how to gather a crowd. So you can make a gold-plated V8 engine that runs on air, but if no one gives a fuck, then no one gives a fuck. And
that's a funny example because everybody would give a fuck about that. And
sure. Maybe I made it too good.
The reason they can't gather a crowd is because it's total bullshit. It's sitting up there on total bullshit island. That's where it is. It's the 200-mile-an-hour carburetor, right? I mean, everybody's got a friend who talks about the 200-mile-an-hour carburetor and the patents and whatever else. And you're like, okay, dude, in the 80s, like the patents were 15 years. And I could sort of understand how something invented in 1970 by the oil companies or by the car companies and then bought up by the oil companies could still affect us in 1984. But it's 40 years after that. The patents don't mean anything. Like, learn something about patents and then come back to me with your story about how the oil companies bought the patents for the 200-mile-an-hour carburetor. Not mile an hour, miles per gallon. Pardon me.
Either way.
Yeah. I don't think you could do 200 miles an hour on a carbureted engine. Do you, Pete?
Sure, why not? It's just more air. More air, more fuel, more spark. Boom,
lighter car, much lighter car. Yeah.
A NASCAR car can go 200 miles an hour.
Are they carbureted or are they fuel injected?
I believe they're carbureted.
You know what? I don't know. See, we're talking in bullshit space here where we don't know the facts and we're just trying
I'm
to sort it out.
ascribing them naturally aspirated engines. Yeah, I don't think that they have, at least not now. I mean, maybe some areas they had turbos and stuff, but yeah, I think they're all naturally aspirated.
Fine. I had the number of 300-mile-an-hour carburetor. How about that?
Oh, well.
Okay, now that we change that, that's very different.
I still think it's possible because it's more about the aerodynamics at some point than it is the carburetor.
I think you're right.
Okay.
I think you're. I'll
concede
the comment too. But see, we had a whole conversation about bullshit, and we actually worked through it, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But
so,
if I were here to wait. If I were here to fact check you, though, I could fact check you. You know, this is the funniest thing about fact checking is when I hear fact checking. Oh, he said something wrong. I'm going to fact check him. Okay, I know that the fact check is going to be worse than what they're fact checking. I know that. This is ascribing, of course, but it has high predictive value. What was the example with the New York Times just yesterday, where they fact checked
the recipe for Fruit Loops or whatever it was?
Fruit Loops, right? Because they fact check a detail. This was Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s claim that Fruit Loops in Canada had fewer ingredients than Fruit Loops in the U.S. And that was his particular claim. And the implication is that we put a lot of garbage in our foods because they need to taste better. They can't use natural ingredients. So we like the, whatever else. So there's sort of a downstream implication of this. The New York Times claims that he was wrong. They fact checked him by saying that there are like 9 total ingredients in Canadian Fruit Loops and 12 or 13 in US Fruit Loops, that it doesn't really make a difference but they're not fact checking him on the detail that he's trying to make a point about, which is the artificial ingredients that are in Fruit Loops, as if it even matters to begin with. Okay, you've got to be out in RFK Jr. land for that to matter to you to begin with. But like, at least if you're going to fact check him, like, pick your battle.
Yeah.
It's like we're all in bullshit space. We all know we're in bullshit space. So when you fact check him, you're going to necessarily be in bullshit space. There's nobody fact checking from fact space. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It's from different opinion space is what it is.
Right. And it's also true that Cliff Clavin was correct when he was doing his Final Jeopardy thing. These are people who had never been in his kitchen. It is a fact. I mean, and I'm doing that to be a little bit silly, but there's all kinds of things like that where you can say, here is a fact. And especially if you cut a conversation and you snug it up so that only this is in there. It's a fact that in this thing, you said this thing.
Right.
Okay. But go like that with your clip, and all of a sudden, different thing. Listen to the whole thing, even dare listen in general to what this person says repeatedly, and then you can then decide: is this person believing this one thing based upon this tiny little clip, which is a fact, or when you look at the body of work, is this person generally going in this direction? Yes, they're actually not going in that direction. Right. Prepare for humans to disagree with themselves and change their minds, right? Because that happens all the time too. So how does all this tie into AI?
Well, of course, it all ties into AI because we have these systems that are, these large language models that are becoming more and more incorporated into our processes, into our daily processes, into, back-end processes. People want to use these, they call them agentic systems, where you have a specially trained LLM, make decisions on what to do with your money, what to do with your lights, what to do with, I don't know, your health, whatever else. I think it's probably not going to work out too well. I think most people who know how the technology works doesn't really see it working out very well. Salesforce is all in on it. The company Salesforce, they're all in on these agentic systems. You can log in right now and you can create agents that do things. And people are trying to figure out, well, what are these things really doing? Because, on the one hand, yes, we know this is scary to let this stochastic parrot, as they call these LLMs, kind of sarcastically, because they're not smart. They're just like putting words together in a way that kind of makes sense. They're plausible. It's, grammatically correct and plausible because of, word statistics is how it does it.
Right.
And we have a system that does that. That's going to make decisions about how customers work through your sales flow.
Right.
That's weird. But now I'm stepping back and I'm saying, hey, you know what? Maybe they're calling it this, but what it really is like that pre-sales call flow that one guy did. That
right.
It triggered me, and I went off on him. Right on his imagine that. Right, it's the guy's social media feed. He's very proud of what he does. Right, and somebody who claims to be an LLM expert. I don't use the word expert in my byline, but it pretty much comes across. Somebody says that's not the right way to do it. I come across as a scold. I don't mean to be a scold. I mean to open discussion and try to figure. I really do mean to open discussion and figure out what he's doing. At the same time, I'm really confident that what he's doing is bullshit. And then it hits me. No, it's not. No, it's absolutely not. He's just, Pete, what's a thing from what's an example from your work as a spy where you could get bad information and it was better than no information, but obviously not as good if the job required perfect information, that you can't go with the bad information. Can you kind of find a continuum there to give an example?
Yeah, there is one, and I'll just take me out of the equation and maybe do a spectrum between me and somebody else, right? So before I go into Valley X, I can likely read up on Valley X and get some knowledge, and maybe even on district or county one where Valley X is. And so I can start to read all this information. Now, I personally wouldn't spend much time doing that, especially if I don't know the person who wrote the information, because I've got very specific needs and desires. And one of them is to not know anything about the area. I'm very comfortable with that. But someone who's junior to me in terms of experience and black belt status in terms of being a spy, they may well feel comfortable and need that information, even if it's flawed. And they may find out totally different things or be a million miles from that fact by the time they finish their tour, because it was just a starting point and they need that starting point so they're comfortable. So when I go someplace, I know I'm going to go to that place. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know how to do it, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Someone who's, again, less experienced is going to want to have comfort, because you have to be comfortable with an uncomfortable thing before you can go out. I've already passed that point where I no longer need that step. Does that make sense?
It makes tremendous sense. Let me bring this back to something I did 35 years ago. It was my first commercial product. It was called Ham Windows, and it was for ham radio operators. And it was the first integrated package. The company I worked with sold it to Kenwood USA, and they distributed it for us. It was like a real success. One of the parts of it was we digitized the CIA World Factbook. Now, the CIA World Factbook was this, it was printed, it was big. You could look up a country or a county within a country and get a description of what's going on there and all this stuff. And what we found was, when we asked ham radio operators what they thought of it, because they'd use like the physical one as they're finding people to talk to all over the world on these ham frequencies and making contact with them and logging their contacts and stuff, it really was very bullshitty. It was sometimes out of date, like an encyclopedia, sometimes out of date, sometimes just plain wrong, sometimes had completely like facts that were just opposite what they were on the ground. And you'd find this and you'd make notes in it and stuff like that. In fact, one of our first requests for a feature request was, hey, we'd like to edit your CIA World Factbook because it's wrong, and we've got notes about this. Really interesting, so there was something where we thought we had ground truth, right? It was a source that was highly respected. It was a brand that was other than offing JFK, right? Like CIA brand, pretty good in 1989, right?
Right.
And and their information was, not very good.
Yeah. Turns out you actually have to be there to write that thing.
Yeah, you have to. Yes. And they didn't have people on the ground everywhere to write it. They had the same problems they have today, just not at scale. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I have an
yeah,
example of that real life, and you've probably heard me talk about this before, but I'm curious how this applies. So we have the PhD guy, and he's in the big palace in Baghdad, which is an American base, and there's this giant palace, the Al Fa Palace, and he's there, and he is doing a paper. This is to help the army. This is not for like his academic credentials. He's already a PhD, and he's going to write about Sadr City, which is a little sub district within Baghdad proper. And a lot of bad things were happening there. And at the time, we couldn't even legally go in there per the agreement that we had with Iraq and everything else. So I had a source that was going into Sadr City. Now, that's all as legitimate as illegitimate things that are kind of maybe in the gray zone can be. But for me, for my purposes, it's good. And so I say to my peer, I didn't think his name was Kevin. Kevin, I have a guy going into Sadr City every day. You're writing a paper. How lucky are you? I've never come into this office because I avoid you guys. I have information. I can get you more. Would you like it? And he says to me, remember, this guy's writing a paper, getting paid to do this about Sadr City. And he says, no, thanks. I have my sources. And he didn't mean like me on the ground. He meant things from the olden days, which could be 2 weeks ago in combat. And so he wanted nothing to do with the information I could get him. And so the second that paper published, I had to go, this isn't based in reality. There's no way. And I looked at it and I tore it apart. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not the Sadr City that we're talking about today. And I wouldn't have even cared, but he was so dismissive of quality ground truth information. I knew he was obsolete before he wrote it. And he was. And then when I showed it around to other people who knew that area, they're like, yeah, this is not good work.
Mm-hmm. And we have a good intuitive sense about that. I talked about
right.
I used the word ontology before. And,
right.
Though you won't find everybody in the world who even knows what the word means. We all have to, at some point, figure out our own personal version of an ontology to approach the world with. Otherwise there are ghosts and goblins under all of our beds. There are
right.
alligators when we walk out the door. There are the sky is filled with things that are watching us or working to destroy us. That one may actually come true, right? I'm not so worried about the alligators, the ghosts and goblins, but things in the sky, yeah, I mean that could kind of happen.
Sure.
But we gotta deal with these things every day. We got to deal with bad information every day, and somehow we have to make choices that don't end us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we have to know when it's important to have really good information and when it's not so important, when it's important to just be able to have a conversation and move along. One of my grandfathers, actually my whole family, they were card players. I don't know if you were, being in the service, I don't know if that was a thing in,
you play cards.
Yeah. Okay. So you guys like poker players, or do you guys like pick up real games like Pinochle and Bridge and those kinds of things?
It was more spades because you don't have
okay.
accoutrement when you're playing it. You just have cards. And so it's games like that where you can sit there and you don't need anything else. Poker, yes, people play poker, but spades, you don't even need a number pad. You can just scratch something on the hunk of wood.
Right. Spades is thinking enough. There's a bidding round, there's a playing round. When you get into a game like Bridge, there's bidding rules, and there's if you violate the bidding rules, you're trying to communicate what your hand is to your partner, but you do it in a way, they have this book called Hoyle. It's like the Bible of Bridge. You do it in a way that the opponents can also figure out what you're trying to communicate, and you're not supposed to bluff. Like, bluffing is absolutely not a thing in Bridge. It's like reason to get thrown out of a bridge club is that you bluff. But there's kind of this level that you can bring in, like if you're a good Pinochle player or a good card player in general, where you kind of challenge somebody with a bid. It's not quite a bluff, but it is kind of a challenge. It's kind of there's these preemptive bids. They're part of Hoyle, but they also, you can stretch a little bit and use them when you think chances are good this is going to work out.
Right.
And my grandfather, probably the best bullshitter I know, just in terms of being able to strike up a conversation with anybody about anything, and then trying new activities out just to like gain like 1 year he's like all into stained glass and he's making these stained glass things. The other year he's rebuilt his Model T. You think I'm crazy with some of my projects and some of the things I've picked up watching me. Oh my grandfather was that times 10, right? But basically the best bullshitter I ever knew. And I mean that 100% positive. He was also like this great card player who could just kind of look at you and know what's in your hand, because you'd have to look back at him to see, and then it would just give it away. And I think that's a lot of, you think it's like this low skill. It's like this, this cowboy skill or this gangster skill or this scofflaw skill, but it's not. It's an information gatherer skill at its core. It's like, how do I gather information in an imperfect world? Well, I'm going to approach it with bullshit and see what bounces back. Yeah. And then I'll know, I'll be able to kind of test, all right, well, what is there here? And I think that's a mode that a lot of us do have to work in, just because there isn't a lot of truth out there. Yes, the sun comes up, the sun sets, right? We've got that truth. That's going to happen as long as we're here on this earth, right? There's not, a meteor's, even if a meteor comes by, Elon Musk will save us from that. It won't mess
and the sun
up.
is still going to rise and set.
Exactly. Right. From our point of view, right? That's absolute truth. We can depend on that, right? But there's so much we deal with in day to day that's just not, it's not quite right, but we think we live in this super truthy world and, truth, justice, in the American way. If Superman were bullshit justice in the American way, he'd have been better. How about that?
Okay. Yeah. Well, and we've seen, if we're going to use the election as an example, we've seen there's a lot of different realities for people where things are 100% true for this group of people, 100% true for this people. And then there's these other groups of people that no one gives a fuck about. And so you try to like, these are all different realities. And this is a lot of what I did when I was being a spy, was I would enter these different realities, and I had the ability, the knack, to try to communicate to the other side once I established relationships and say, hey, this is what it's like over there. And if you want to impact that, you maybe want to tune your machine to better enter into that space, even if it's temporarily, and you do it kind of ham-handed. Ham-handed is better than what you think you're doing now, which is not working.
Pete, how many people in your field of work, the spy thing, do you think really approach their job that way? I wrote this one post I wrote recently was about Alexis de Tocqueville, right? And Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, he comes here allegedly to study prisons for the French aristocracy, and what he ends up doing is just shut the fuck up, looking around and writing down what he saw. And then falling in love with what he saw. That's like some of the magic of it, right? But we look at Alexis de Tocqueville like historically, and of course there's a French part of his existence and what he did in France, and he was an aristocrat, a politician. He kind of moved from center left to center right, in his long political career. But he came here as this outsider who just looked and marveled at what we'd done, and we look at like the actual things that he wrote and we say, that's the lesson. And to me, the real lesson is the dude sat down, listened, and watched and wrote it down. Like, that's something we could all emulate. How many people in your field of work did that?
Well, we're all supposed to, right? But we're also, Rich Leday and I call it gonzo anthropology, when we're looking at that part of it. And it's because we're part of that environment. We're impacting it. And this is where you're trying to travel, not invisibly, but you're trying to leave as little of you in that environment as possible so you can sop up what's there. And that is, if everybody's trying to do that, it is not a common skill to attain professional level, grade capability. It's just not common because we don't have enough access to the field in that particular line of work. So a lot of it is, as you're still in the bullshit phase of trying to sort out, how do I do this? And you're just making all these mistakes. You are doing it. You're gathering things. They probably are valuable because you think that they are. But is it the most valuable? Is it the most efficient? No, none of those things. So people, if they enter the space to look for that, yeah, maybe. But the other problem, and this is confounding, and hopefully this helps you make your point, but we're so focused on threat, we miss the big picture. So unlike de Tocqueville, we stay focused on threat. We don't, we can't get off of prisons and see the whole thing that's going on and go, this is a marvelous thing. And the other
I don't think
question
he
I
was
would
really
ask,
trying to get off of prison so much as that was an excuse to get a ship ticket. I was going to say a plane ticket. They didn't have planes then. But
whatever.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
for sure.
And was he able to successfully communicate between the two parties and improve the condition of both sides through that information?
The prison information? Like he gave up on that, right?
His overall mission, the thing he actually poured his heart into.
Yeah, obviously he's legendary for democracy in America. Like we study him in college, we study him in high school. I mean, he had a huge impact for doing it.
About the French?
Well, they did have their revolution, which is mixed bag.
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is if he's doing that, hopefully he's connecting with the king and Parliament or whatever.
They had demise as a colonial power. They met the same fate as Britain. They needed Uncle Sam to come save their asses twice. I don't know how successful he was there, or if he could have been. He may have been on a sinking ship, the Titanic.
A good example of this is we all laud Lawrence of Arabia because he did this great work, but he wasn't relevant to the command.
Right.
Except for he's taking Aqaba and all these other things he's doing, but they don't know who he is. So when he shows up, they're like, who is this dude in these flowing robes and a great tan? And he's like, I've got very important news. And they're like, but who are you? Yeah. And so he wasn't able to connect the two worlds in a way that allowed the improvement of the condition of both of them.
Right. So I get to, the point of bringing up Alexis de Tocqueville is I find myself in this AI thing. Like everything in tech is touched by AI right now. There's no way to avoid it. Everybody wants to know your AI story, whether they're going to pay you money to fund you, whether they're going to pay you money as a customer. For some reason, it's terribly important to them. And, I always learned that, I learned once from an English teacher that when people come and ask you a big question, it's totally okay to stop and take 10 seconds to think. And they'll say, why don't you answer now? Why haven't you thought about this? Shut up. I'm taking 10 seconds to think, right? Turns out that's a huge power move. And it's a huge power move that anybody can incorporate into their game. And, unless you've run into somebody who knows that, you are immediately powerful when you just say, stop, I'm going to think about this a moment. We have not, as an industry, had 10 minutes to think or 10 seconds to think. We are expected to have an answer and a solution. And the reason we're expected this, at least in my head, is because everybody expects that we're so good at optimizing whatever comes up. Yeah, we'll figure out how to optimize this. Yeah. And so they look to us for leadership on this. We don't know what we're doing. And, I've just sat back and I've watched, what all the sides of AI are doing. There's people who are proponents who say, hey, we're going to have this artificial general intelligence, which is going to be smarter than 3,000 PhDs. And it's going to live on a server that's up in the cloud somewhere, just like God. And it's going to make all the decisions for you. And it's going to be absolutely wonderful. And human beings are never going to have to work again. And we're going to need, what's that income that's every month?
Universal basic income.
Yes, we're going to need UBI, and we're never going to use oil again. Everything's going to be electric, and It's wonder that the whales aren't going to die from windmills. What? Every perfect. It's going to solve the climate, right? I mean, all this stuff, and no, they're full of beans, right? And then we have, the critics, and they came on and they said it's going to destroy everything. It's going to take control of all our weapons, and then it's going to blow up the earth. And they've got all sorts of different visions of that. And then you've got the people who are like, well, it's going to have bad ideas. Whether it's going to be, they're going to be socialist ideas, or whether it's Black George Washington or whatever else, they're going to have terrible ideas, and we need to control the kinds of ideas that it does. And you got all these sides, and they're so dug in, and yet you have this tool and somehow people are finding ways to use it. You often tell me ways that you use ChatGPT for something, and I like I'm born to do, right? I immediately judge you, and I think, okay, Pete, this isn't going to work out well for you if this is important, right? I always kind of knew that.
Right.
But I also knew that you'd know if it didn't work out well for you because it was important, and you weren't going to go, jumping into once you figured out it was a meat grinder, you're not going to put your hand in there, right?
Right.
You'll back out a little bit. And I could trust that because you have good sense. But I can't help but like thinking, okay, but then I'm like, well, why? Why do you think this is it? Like one of the things is ChatGPT, it always gives you an answer. Like even if it doesn't know the answer, it'll give you an answer. You know people like that. I'm probably a person like that. I'll do my best. And that's like the bullshitter thing. But you have people who go beyond bullshitting and, they pretend to be knowledgeable of things they absolutely aren't because they think they have to be knowledgeable. They think they can't take the 10 seconds to think about it. And they also think they can't say, I don't know. I don't know. Like since the time we were kids, it's been beaten into us by the smartest people we always knew. If you don't know, just say you don't know.
Yeah.
And yet, how many people default to that? Not many.
No. Yeah.
Not many. Just smart people.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
ChatGPT never says it doesn't know.
Right. Yeah. Well, I just asked it to do a bio for me, and it's like, I don't know that guy.
Oh, good for you. Okay. Well, that's great.
Copilot did that. Yeah. And it's like, I don't know. But in the past, it's like, you know what? He graduated from Michigan. This dude's a bad motherfucker. He was a Green Beret, as a matter of fact.
Pete Turner.
Made up all these facts. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I know.
Pete A. Turner specifically.
Pete A. Turner. Right.
Right. And so they fabricated to me that was this optical illusion or whatever. And that also was funny.
So what you're saying there, Pete, what
you're
saying there is ChatGPT turned you into a modern day Paul Bunyan.
That's yeah. There you go. Yeah, and that hallucination, right, starts to validate itself because it's a hallucination. Right. But I don't want to get distracted by that. When we're talking about bullshit and AI and trying to use this thing, there is that first pit of bullshit. Is like, oh no, we have to have AI in our machine, whatever it is, right? Because if you don't have AI, everybody's going to look at you and think, why don't you have AI? Even though I don't even know what I need it for, right? I mean, so some of the automation things, I like to say that, like I like when my blender makes me a margarita instead of a daiquiri, and I just have a button for that, and it knows that's AI. That's AI that's reliable, and it's a fact that I have a daiquiri now instead of a margarita, right? But if I was to ask it, and I might try this to make a bio for you for this episode, I'm going to have to read that thing and I'm going to have to edit it because it's not going to be accurate. And I'll say, hey, give me 250 words or less on Brad Hutchings. And it's going to be like, Brad Hutchings has a beard or whatever it's going to come up with.
Brad Hutchings went to University of Utah and then was a professor there in electrical engineering. I actually met the guy once. My age, I think he was probably a descendant of the Hutchings family that stopped in Utah when the brother got scalped. And then my grandfather's grandfather, he kept going and got to Los Angeles because we aren't pussies like the Hutchings from Utah. That's the story my grandmother told me. Yes.
Right.
But you might get that guy. He's a little more famous than I am.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to give you the wrong answer because your all-knowing computer can't figure out which Brad I want, can't ask a single fucking question.
Right.
Well, that's... When does it ask the right question? When does it fact check itself and go, wait a second, I just invented some shit?
It doesn't. Or because that's what it does.
What if they humped the two Brad Hutchings together in the virtual world and made a new Brad Hutchings?
Yeah, no, I don't think either of us would be for that. But you bring up a good point, which is we ascribe word of the day. I thought the word of the day was going to be bullshit, but it turns out to be ascribe. We ascribe intelligence, we ascribe thinking to these machines. They are not intelligent. They do not think. They put together sentences, one word at a time. This is literally what they do. One word at a time to give a plausible answer that's grammatically correct. Boom. That's it. Now, if that were anytime somebody talks to you, Brad, put a word at a time together to make a plausible answer that's grammatically correct. It take a little bit of tax my brain a little because that's not how I always work, right? but I think I could probably do it. And I could probably sit there and drink coffee and watch TV and do it too. And
Can I make a problem for you for that statement? Because even that statement requires some context or clarity.
sure.
In what style guide?
Well, now you've added a style guide to it. Yeah, I don't think
Right?
they really have a style. The style guide of the LLM is the internet. It's all the pages it's trained on. It's petabytes of data. That's millions of terabytes of
So
data.
it can't reliably do a grammatically correct statement.
It does. It does. Have you gotten grammatically incorrect statements? And that's because you choose training data that has grammatically correct statements. You filter that stuff out.
Well, there's a way to write the style, right? And that's part of the grammar. So if you're doing one sentence, one dot after one space after a sentence, and that style guide requires two, you got a lot of unfucking to do.
Yeah, to train a style guide, like what's the standard style guide? The AP style guide.
AP,
One.
APA, one of the two. You know,
Yeah.
there's other ones, but yeah.
There's
right.
other ones, but to train a style guide on an LLM turns out to be really expensive because they have particular rules, and you need to tell it, do it this way a lot of times before it
Right.
kind of gets the message. And still, it's not 100% perfect.
Right.
So you'll get outputs. They have to be evaluated against the style guide. Yes, you can write programs that evaluate text against a style guide and recommend corrections and whatever that aren't really LLM based. They're just more programming based. And they've been around for years, right? I mean, they've had style guides and word processors for years, long before AI. But yeah, it's a tough problem.
Yeah, and even then there was another problem in there, and I've lost track of what it was. But that the whole style guide thing. Oh, and if you have to go to another program, now you've got a different program that all of a sudden it's like I should just master the style guide myself. So
Yes.
one, I can always edit my shit.
But look,
two,
Pete, a good tech guy can come in and optimize all this for you. You don't have to think about these.
Right, except for when you hand it to your boss, who's like, "This
Right.
is like what? When did you not learn this in college?" And you're like, "Oh, I relied on a robot," you know.
Yeah.
And then your boss takes a cigar, can't even use words, and puts it back in his mouth, and you leave.
Yeah, we definitely have to, keep our writing muscle intact. I think that is a worry that a lot of people have as well. If these things can write all these things for us, and it's, maybe it's typically one or two in the bullshit spectrum. It's close to truth. It's not quite total bullshit, but it's close to truth most of the times. We might stop writing ourselves. And, certainly, as you know, because you write a lot, and I relearn a lot of times because I go through cycles of writing a lot and, doing a lot of things. And when you exercise the muscle a lot, it's easy. When you exercise the muscle a lot, you find those creative connections and those big points. And, we talked about, basically 3 articles plus an article I read that I wrote something on for an hour here that I wrote in about 2 days after, kind of sitting in a couch looking at TV because I was sick for, a weekend. Yeah. Your writing muscle really, really works. If you don't practice it, it's not going to work like that.
Yeah.
So that is a concern.
Yeah.
That's a big concern.
There's a and I want your thoughts on this. There's an art to writing. Like I'm working on a bunch of pieces, and I kind of pick them up and I work on them and I make them a little better, and then I put them down. But because they're very challenging for me to write, and that's one of the reasons why I like doing it. It's kind of how I work on my muscle. But I'm writing an episode, a thing on Kirk Gibson. And by the way, nobody reads these damn things. And I should say, hardly anyone reads these things. But I always enjoy writing them, so that's why I write them. And if I could be done in 5 minutes, if that, with Copilot, right? And even if I went through and proofed it, I would be done in an hour if I updated it. But it would never provide the interesting bits of knowledge that are, what's going to make this Kirk Gibson thing is there's so many great quotes. There's so many great moments that were captured in old newspapers. Now, the LLM probably has access to all that stuff, but it won't have the ability to give you the interesting things that aren't just common knowledge. I'm going to dig up quotes, events, things that you probably lost track of, and I'm going to put them out there in front of people because to do Kirk Gibson's service, it's not to say, hey, he hit this big home run in game 1 of '88. Everybody knows that. I don't need a robot to tell me that. I need a robot that can dig deep and go through the archives and go, let me tell you some fascinating shit about Kirk Gibson.
Yeah, you need some really specific details. And I think if you needed 20, let's just call them 20 really specific details to do that article, to, kind of put a pitch over the plate so that you can hit it out of the park with some observation about that detail. It's going to get 21 of them wrong.
Right.
And so that's a problem there. When you need details, you need to go find those details. Now, I could certainly see giving it those details and then having it write something based on those details. And that might be valuable to you. It might be a valuable way to have something write something for you. But you need the details correct. You have to have those correct before you can go on with things. So let me, with that, let me switch to something that's kind of related. I got persimmons. You ever had a persimmon?
We have a persimmon tree.
Okay, you're my new best friend, Pete, because I want all the persimmons. I'm going to outbid everybody for the persimmons on your tree. I freaking love them. Okay, I was this many days -1 yesterday when I tasted my first persimmon. Okay. Yeah. So the first thing that comes to my mind, because I'm always trying to figure out a way to make fun of things, is, do I need permission to eat a persimmon? And no, I don't. But I think just the wordplay there is kind of funny. And I'm thinking immediately kid's story, right? Okay. And then this is the part that'll absolutely piss you off, is I want a kid's story. I want Eeyore to ask for permission to eat a persimmon because it's a tongue twister. Okay. So here's the question. Am I going to write that story out? Am I going to use what little writing muscle I have today to write that story? And the answer is, it's not that important. But if I can cue an LLM to write a story about Eeyore thinking he needs permission. This is tough to say, right? He needs permission to eat a persimmon, but he has difficulty asking because it's such a tongue twister. Okay. That took me 10 seconds to type. Okay. It actually took me 20 because I'm a bad typist. And then it took the LLM running on my laptop a minute to come up with a cute story about how he finally solves the problem by writing it down so he doesn't have to pronounce it and handing it to Piglet, and Piglet telling him, no, you don't need permission to eat a persimmon. I didn't have to write that. I could be delighted by expanding the thought. And I think that that's going to be a way that we say, hey, these LLMs are welcome in our lives. They're welcome to do bullshitty things. It's totally okay. But we need to accept that they don't write everything for us. They write details that don't really matter, or just bring delight. They're not about truth. And that is the ontology that we need to come to. And we need to be a little more explicit about, and kind of tell when people operate that way and when they don't,
Yeah. That's an interesting, way to think about how I want to use, AI and the capability of the tool, so that it's not frustrating me because it can't give me what I want, and it's more accurate with what I need. That's cool. That's cool. I like that.
Thanks, Pete.
Yeah. All right. Let me do this thing here. Hold on one sec. I'm gonna.
Yes, sir.
Hold for 1 second here. Okay, good. And then I'm gonna bring Matt Lesko in here. Hey, Matt.
Hi, it's Matthew.
Matthew. Sorry, Matthew.
And I'm Matthew.
Yeah.
Hey, Matthew.
Yeah. Are we scheduled to rock the house right now? Is that what?
It was
is that
5
what
o'clock?
we're doing?
I thought but if you want to do it,
you might be right. I'm using this program now, and it doesn't cross over well to my. Its scheduler does not cross over well to my scheduler, so I apologize. I'm caught a little off step here, and then I'm trying to look in here. I'm like, wait, where is my schedule for the thing? So give me a sec here while I get my bearings.
That's all right.
Give me 1 sec. Brad, you remember Matthew Lesko? Ask Lesko.
Yes.
He's going to be on the show.
He's just being polite. He doesn't remember.
No, we all remember.
I can't forget the colors. The colors are amazing.
How do
Well,
I
it
find
just
that
it
stupid
brightens up
thing?
my life if I dress this way.
I had no idea there was a
Messages.
green like that. I mean, outside of sneakers, maybe.
Right.
I've seen it on
November
sneakers.
19th, 2 p.m.
And
That
it
is
makes people
okay.
smile. So anywhere
Yeah.
I go, the people
No
are smiling
shit.
at me.
No.
And I
All
don't
right.
get that at home, so it's nice.
Right.